Today's story is about a woman who responded to her arrogant sister-in-law's attempts to assert dominance by using informal language and treated her with strictness. Let's take a look together.
I am a woman who has enjoyed reading online stories since my college days. I am now a working mom raising a child. I used to read a lot on the internet. So I was a bit disappointed when it disappeared. I occasionally visit online cafes to read various stories. It's a good way to pass the time during my commute. Just like reading news or stories. I've been reading stories for almost 20 years now. And there are many people who find it difficult because of their in-laws, then and now. I also had some concerns because of my clueless brother-in-law. But I learned a lot from the comments, and it was very helpful. An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. That's what I learned. In social life, most people are haughty to the humble and humble to the haughty. I consider the relationship with my in-laws as a kind of social life. Let me write about the experience I had with my in-laws. My husband is 2 years younger than me. He is a young and handsome man who always follows me and says he loves me. How could I resist this man? He is kind-hearted and considerate. So I really liked him. We dated for a long time before getting married. But there was a twist. I thought my husband was very handsome. But I realized that others didn't think so. I was surprised a few times. It seems that my husband is a man with a mysterious appearance that only looks handsome to me. My husband has an older sister who is a year older than him. That's the problematic sister-in-law. Since my husband is 2 years younger than me. My sister-in-law is 1 year younger than me. When I first visited my in-law's house, my sister-in-law was already married and had a child attending daycare. I had many moments of anger because of my sister-in-law. And I even had moments where I wondered if I shouldn't get married. I greeted both families and went to my sister-in-law's relative's house for a celebration. After returning from there, I learned something surprising. It turns out my sister-in-law had a lot to say about my appearance, makeup, and hairstyle. My sister-in-law evaluated me diligently in front of her parents-in-law and relatives. She commented on my makeup and said, "What kind of makeup is that? Is that how you dress for gatherings with adults?" I just wore a simple semi-formal suit and did light makeup. My hairstyle was just long hair like ordinary women. Most of the people at the gathering were strangers to me. So I couldn't talk much. I stayed quiet. My sister-in-law not only criticized my appearance, but also my personality. She said I looked too timid. She said that if I was so timid, I wouldn't be able to fulfill my role as a wife and mother properly. How could my sister-in-law, who hadn't even talked to me much, know so much about me? Anyway, my husband also deserves criticism for conveying everything to me, without any filtering. I have an outgoing personality. I speak comfortably with people I meet for the first time. But even if I have an extroverted personality, I can't fully express myself in front of my future in-laws and relatives. Unless there's an opportunity for that. While reading various stories and comments, I made a firm decision. If I want to live with a handsome and young man, I have to deal with my sister-in-law first. That's what I was determined inside. When we were in the midst of wedding preparations, my sister-in-law suggested having a meal together. So my sister-in-law's family, my husband, and I met at a barbecue restaurant. When my sister-in-law saw me, she immediately started speaking informally. Doesn't she know my age? I thought to myself. Even if she is my younger brother's wife, I learned that it is respectful to use honorifics when speaking to someone older. So I asked her why she was speaking informally to me. She responded by saying that it's natural to speak informally to someone who is close, and asked if I didn't know that. First impressions are important. So I said to her, "Hey, you grew up without learning any manners. Huh? I heard that even if your nephew is older than you don't use informal language. Were you sleeping when learning manners?" I spoke to her like that. She looked surprised and asked me, "What did you just say?" So, I said, "Seeing you, I can tell that there's something wrong with your family. I'm not marrying this person. Now I'm just a sister older than you. Maybe your older sister needs to educate you. Listen carefully." I insulted her to an extreme extent. "I heard that you graduated from high school and did nothing, and then got pregnant before marriage. You seem to act so shamelessly because you haven't experienced social life. Looking at a person with problems like you, I can tell that there must be something wrong in your family. That's why I'm not marrying this person. We're breaking up because of you." I went a bit overboard with my words and then got up and left. My husband followed me and spoke to me, angrily, asking how I could speak to his sister like that. So I said, "Your sister started using informal language first. Shouldn't you have corrected her first?" Since he stayed silent, I just went home. I think my sister-in-law wanted to meet me that day to assert her dominance. Why bother someone who stays silent? I felt that it was best to assert myself strongly against such childish behavior. Of course, it didn't mean that I didn't want to marry my husband. As I mentioned before, in my eyes, he was a young and handsome man. For the next few days, my husband apologized to me through calls and messages. He told his parents everything that happened between his sister and me. According to him, his parents called his sister and spoke to her. They said that it's not right to speak informally to someone who could potentially be her sister-in-law, even if they are younger. Hearing this, I felt relieved. If his parents had taken his sister's side, I would have been in a difficult position. Maybe I wouldn't have married him. When the wedding date was approaching, I went to my in-laws' house to have a meal. My sister-in-law's family was also there. I helped my mother-in-law prepare the meal and even did the dishes after the meal. It didn't matter to me whether I was a daughter-in-law or a daughter. I thought it was appropriate for someone younger than my mother-in-law to do it. After finishing the dishes and going to the living room, I noticed that my parents-in-law had gone into their room, and only my sister-in-law and her husband were there. They were sitting in front of a table with snacks, and my sister-in-law said, "I quite like you today. You even did the dishes." So I said, "Mom prepared the food, so at least I should help with the dishes. It seems like you have no intention of doing the dishes. How can a daughter be like that?" I said that. My sister-in-law's face turned red, and she stayed silent. So I didn't say anything more. That day, my husband drove me home with a face not knowing what to say. My husband found it amusing how I spoke to his sister. He seemed to have lived under his strong-willed sister's influence. Even after getting married, my sister-in-law continued with her bad habits, and had a few confrontations. She would make comments about my role as a daughter-in-law. So I told her that not the words a daughter-in-law who never visits her in-laws should say. My sister-in-law's husband told my husband that he was glad I said what he wanted to say. He said it felt refreshing to have someone speak on his behalf. She complained when her parents were going to the hospital. I didn't accompany them. I said, "You are the daughter who doesn't have a job, and yet, should the daughter-in-law leave her job to take parents to the hospital? Is that necessary?" I said it in front of my parents-in-law. I told her she is a selfish person who doesn't do her both duties as a daughter and an in-law. I emphasized that in this world, you can't just live as you please, and you have to live in a way that sets an example for your children to learn from. I spoke in a somewhat strict tone. Looking back, I think I made some mistakes, considering that my sister-in-law's child was with us at the time. I feel sorry for speaking like that in front of the child. My sister-in-law still speaks to me politely. She calls me with manners and use honorifics. And sometimes, I see her trying to control her words. She knows that if she doesn't, I might say something even harsher. It seems like my sister-in-law got used to living in a self-indulgent way, surrounded by her family, husband, and in-laws who all cater to her. But meeting me, who points out her mistakes, must be frustrating for her. Besides the things I mentioned, my sister-in-law has done some unpleasant things to me on several occasions. It's not bad things, but more like actions without consideration. Every time, I made sure she deeply regretted her actions. My mother was very worried when she saw my sister-in-law, who would interrupt conversations during formal meetings and talk loudly, thinking she is so great. I told my mother that I'm not a fool who would suffer because of a foolish person like her. Honestly, at that time, I was stubborn and a bit scared of her, who only knew herself. But in the end, things turned out the way I said to my mother. After I tamed my sister-in-law, my husband also started pointing out her behavior and words, and he would speak politely. Thank you for listening.
It seems that the sister-in-law is someone who is strong to the strong and weak to the weak. People like this are selfish. It's a good thing for the in-laws too that the sister-in-law has been daunted. The in-laws have been blessed having someone like the writer as a daughter. What are your thoughts on this?